Today, we're diving into a really powerful and honestly pretty controversial idea, the broken window theory. It sounds simple, right? But this one idea about crime literally changed how cities are policed all around the world. So let's get into it.
It all boils down to this one kind of shocking question. Can something as small as a single broken window, if you just leave it there, actually kick off a whole crime wave in a neighborhood? Well, the theory we're talking about today says absolutely yes.
So what is it exactly? Well, the broken window theory basically says that the little things matter a lot. When you see visible signs of neglect, graffiti, trash piling up, or a literal broken window, it sends out a signal. And that signal is, nobody cares around here. No one's in charge. The theory argues that this vibe, this feeling of no one being in control, is like an open invitation for more disorder, and eventually much more serious crime.
Now, this idea got so popular because, let's be honest, it just feels intuitive. It kind of makes common sense, right? So let's break down exactly how this simple but really powerful idea is supposed to play out.
So this didn't just come out of nowhere. The idea was really brought into the mainstream back in 1982 by two social scientists, James Q. Wilson and George Kelling. They wrote this article that laid out the whole framework, and wow, did it influence mayors and police chiefs for decades to come.
You can think of it like a chain reaction, a domino effect. Step 1, it starts small. Some graffiti shows up, or a window gets broken and isn't fixed. Step 2, this starts sending that signal of neglect. Step 3, this is crucial. People who live there start to feel unsafe. They might withdraw, use public spaces less, and stop looking out for one another. The community bonds start to fray. And that leads to step 4. This creates a vacuum, an environment where more serious criminal activity feels, well, permissible.
Okay, so that's the theory. But what happens when you take an idea from an academic article and apply it to one of the biggest, most chaotic cities in the world? Well, that brings us to the famous New York City experiment.
So picture this. It's the 1990s, and New York City becomes the ultimate test case. Mayor Rudy Giuliani and his police commissioner, William Bratton, they go all in on what they called order maintenance policing. They started cracking down, and I mean aggressively, on all those minor offenses. People jumping the subway turnstiles, drinking in public, graffiti artists. And the result? By the end of the decade, serious crime in New York had dropped dramatically. It was a historic fall.
This quote right here really nails their whole philosophy. The strategy was simple. You sweat the small stuff. You fix the little signs of disorder so that the environment never even gets to a point where serious crime can get a foothold. And on the surface, man, it looks like a massive, undeniable success. But you knew there was a but coming, right? As the dust settled, researchers and critics started looking a little closer, and they started to find some pretty big cracks in the theory itself. The big question became, was this story just a little too perfect?
And this right here became the central debate. Nobody denies that the crime rate in New York dropped spectacularly. That's a fact. But was the broken window policing strategy the reason for that drop? Or was it just something that happened to be going on at the same time?
So this is super important to get, the difference between correlation and causation. See, two things happening together, like cracking down on disorder and crime rates falling, that's a correlation. It's an observation. But proving that one thing caused the other, that is a much, much higher bar to clear. And this is where the theory really started to get into hot water. Because it turns out there was a ton of other stuff going on in the 90s. The national economy was getting stronger. The devastating crack cocaine epidemic was finally starting to fade. Police departments were also using all sorts of new technologies and other strategies. Any one of these things, or more likely a combination of them, could also explain that historic drop in crime.
And beyond that whole scientific debate, an even more urgent criticism started to pop up. This one focused on the very real, very human consequences of this style of policing.
This zero-tolerance approach that grew out of the theory, well, it had some intense side effects. It led to a massive spike in arrests for tiny offenses. And as you might guess, that seriously damaged the trust between police and the communities they served. And that impact wasn't felt equally. It disproportionately hit minority communities the hardest.
This really gets to the heart of one of the sharpest criticisms. Think about it. Many of the behaviors being targeted, like sleeping on a park bench, panhandling, or not being able to afford a subway fare, these are often just acts of survival for people who are homeless or living in deep poverty. So critics argued the policy ended up punishing people for being vulnerable instead of actually solving the problems that led to that vulnerability.
Yeah, the human cost was significant.
It led to aggressive tactics like stop and frisk and the over-policing of already marginalized neighborhoods. All of this just eroded trust in the police. And by focusing so much on punishing these minor signs of disorder, it often meant resources were pulled away from addressing the real root causes of crime. Things like poverty and a lack of opportunity.
So, where does that leave us? Does all this mean the original idea was totally wrong? Well, not necessarily. What it really means is that we had to learn from these mistakes and find a much, much smarter way forward. And today, a much more evidence-based approach is taking hold. So instead of just relying on making arrests, the focus is now on things like investing in better lighting or cleaning up public spaces. And here's the key. It's about engaging the residents as actual partners in finding solutions instead of just punishing poverty with these blanket zero-tolerance rules. You can really see the two different paths clearly here. You can go down the punishment-focused road, which is all about heavy enforcement and runs the risk of doing real harm to community trust. Or you can take a problem-solving approach, which is all about fixing the environment, empowering residents, and tackling those tricky root causes. And we have amazing examples that this new way works. In cities like Philadelphia and Baltimore, studies found that something as simple as cleaning up and planting grass in vacant lots, which is a direct, modern way of fixing broken windows, actually led to a big drop in gun assaults in those areas. And get this, it happened without a single additional arrest. So in the end, the real lesson here is about finding a balance. The best, most defensible approach is one that pairs taking care of the physical environment with genuine community empowerment. It keeps that core insight of the original theory, that our surroundings really do matter, but it avoids all the huge social costs of how it was first put into practice.
Which leaves us with one last question to think about. The original theory started by asking what a broken window signals. But the modern, smarter approach asks something deeper, something more important. What is the absolute best way to show that a community is truly cared for? And the answer to that? Well, it probably involves a lot more than just policing. It involves investment, partnership, and real empowerment.